All right, quickly and briefly responding to Damiano from Integral Global, Dialogue Amongst Dumpster Fires, Episode 1, Epistemology and Ontology. I'm just going to go ahead and play some of this.
Alyosha mentioned that no solid criticism is made of David Long in Integral 2.0. While I don't think that is true, as many valid criticisms have been raised in the past,
I wonder what he's talking about.
here is my contribution. I hope it can be productive and that we can maintain a civil discourse. Integral 2.0 offers valid criticism of the way integral theory has made strong metaphysical claims by either appealing to individual experience or by appealing to traditions. This has given plenty of space to people who hold mythical dogmatic beliefs to feel validated. David's group expresses a higher sensitivity to the most negative effects of such thinking. Both fundamentalist religiosity and New Age thinking have caused actual damage, both philosophically and physically, to many people, and this is a valid concern. That said, I think David Long and Integral 2.0 are making a mistake, or some mistakes. In particular, they confuse the opinion, idealism, with the way the opinion is formed, mythical dogmatic thinking. They seem to conflate one's own ontology with their epistemology.
Well, it's not that these things have been confused, it's that if you don't arrive at conclusions with a good epistemology, with a good methodology, that you don't actually arrive at good conclusions, and that's the problem. It's not that they're conflated, it's that you don't come to this conclusion by way of reason and rationality. There's no good evidence for it, it's not falsifiable, there's not a reasonable case to be made for these things that actually stands up to criticism. Yeah, I mean, sure, there are people who have tried to make reasonable cases for these things, and maybe even tried to be reasonable about how they arrive at these conclusions, but they don't stand.
This is problematic, both in theory and in practice.
No, what's problematic in theory and in practice is if you try to act like it doesn't matter how you come to your conclusions. It absolutely does, because it informs what the conclusions are. If you don't have a good methodology, you don't arrive at a good conclusion.
In theory, it's problematic because it halts any intelligent discussion on the topic.
Absolutely not. It doesn't halt any intelligent discussion on the topic. Part of what we're trying to do is to invite people who think that they can justify these worldviews to step up and see if they actually can stand or not. We're not trying to halt any kind of communication on the topic. It's very similar to what like Randy and some of these other rationalists have tried to do when it comes to the issues of psychic powers and things like this, magical powers. They're like, step up and prove it. There's an open invitation to people who think that they can reasonably hold these things. And kind of a challenge, like, I don't think that you can actually prove this stuff. Let's see if you can. And so it doesn't halt conversation, it invites people to step up, and to the extent to which people can't actually step up and support these things, then it rightfully halts these conversations.
They seem to categorically exclude that it may be possible in good faith and with rational thinking to land on an idealist perspective, with very few exceptions like mathematical idealism.
No, that's not true. I don't think that good faith and an attempt at rationality negates the possibility of arriving at an idealistic conclusion. I just think that it won't stand because it's not actually good enough or true enough. It's not that I'm saying everybody who arrives at this conclusion is coming to it in bad faith or is completely irrational, but a lot of them are pretty irrational, and the ideas don't actually stand up to criticism. That's the claim. So instead of worrying about the feelings and the intentions of the individual, the point is as simple as this. It's an idea that doesn't stand. And the burden of proof is on the person who makes the claim, right? So the idea is, if you think it can stand, then you would be invited to demonstrate that it can stand. And I have never seen a valid, positive case for these ideas that stands, or even one that's even based on rational standards. There are some appeals to particular idealistic philosophers and stuff like this, but if you actually trace the philosophers back and figure out what they actually think, many of them are literal fundamentalist believers, basically apologists for some religious idea. Even Descartes thinks he's going to do this really reasonable project, but he ends up sneaking God back in through the back door.
This also gives an alibi to assume that all people who argue for idealism are either not epistemically humble or in bad faith.
Yeah, I would say that that's the case. Every person who is an idealist is not epistemically humble enough because they're, by definition, overstepping their bounds beyond what we can know. They're making absolute truth claims beyond what we actually know. That's not epistemically humble.
I think a lot of the criticism David receives and didn't listen to, it's not that idealism is 100% true. It's simply, look, It's not moronic or forbidden to entertain this idea, especially if done so rationally.
No, no. Look, there's a lot of people who are really smart who hold these ideas. And there's a lot of people who are at early integral and late green stages who are deeply confused because there are ways that we are all connected. And there are ways that Buddhism and state training has value. And unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion and miscommunication, even amongst the people who are telling these stories. So there's a lot of different stories, and they sound like they're all talking about very similar things, but these symbols could actually be cashed out in the light of several different worldviews. I've said over and over and over again, almost every time I've talked about this, that I don't think people who come to idealistic conclusions are stupid or something like this, or that they're necessarily in bad faith. I think that their ideas don't stand, and that most of them are epistemically overstepping, and these are not actually conclusions that people arrive at through rational epistemologies or integral epistemologies. People already have this view, and they come into integral, and they find ways to justify it more confirmation bias style. Most people who have this view have not tried to falsify it. And let's be real, most people in general are not really rational. Most people in general don't even know the basic logic. Most people in general are not incredibly skeptical or try to falsify their ideas. In general, most people are not good at rationality. So it's not like some huge personal insult to say that people are not coming to these conclusions based on rational standards. It's just the state of affairs. People, for the most part, do not have rationality online. That is also the case with many people in our integral community. Many of the people in our community have come to this community by way of Buddhism, by way of New Age philosophy, by way of all these kinds of things, and not by way of philosophy or a rational, rigorous background. I would like to see an actual example of this, because it's easy to say, oh, well, some people do it rationally. Well, where? Who? Where's their positive ground-up case for it? Let's see that. And again, the whole problem with where you're coming from around this is to try to make it okay that some people hold different beliefs than other people. It's about trying to flatten things and make room for everyone's belief. And the concern is to make everybody comfortable and to let everything be okay, as opposed to really get at the truth. So this is why these concerns even seem just really green. Like, why are we so concerned that these people feel stupid, as opposed to being more concerned about what's actually true and getting it right? The emphasis seems to be on people's feelings over facts. If people feel upset versus getting it right. This is not the way to arrive at what's actually true and good. It's a way of flattening everything and stopping development.
David claimed many times that he has never seen a good case for idealism.
True.
Yet his group never provided a clear criticism of some of the best attempts.
Maybe I haven't provided a clear breakdown of some of the best attempts, but to be honest with you, I haven't seen a good attempt that I would be like, oh, this is a good attempt. I've dealt with some people like Keith Price. I've dealt with Wilbur's ideas. I've dealt with several people who have different ways of trying to justify these ideas. So to say he hasn't even tried to deal with some of the best attempts, it's like, yes, I have. I've dealt with Wilbur's approach to it, and really that should be the main one that I need to deal with in a community of integralists, right? We should be talking about integral standards and integral philosophy, and it shouldn't even matter if I can find the person who has the best version of it. The question is, can you bring out actually a person who makes a good argument for it? What's actually a good argument? Also, this movement is fairly new. You will definitely see debates around these things. We've already seen some of that. People in my group, idealists and emergentists, have had a debate. I've hosted that. I've been critical of several different people. And actually, Rasmus, the guy who Alyosha did a debate with, he has sent me some stuff about just this topic, wanting me to deal with what one of these really popular idealist people think. I think his name is Bernardo or something like this. Anyways, I told him that next time I go live in my group that I will be responding to that and dealing with those points. So this is one of those things that's definitely going to come up over and over again, and it's going to get dealt with over and over again in lots of different media. Just because it doesn't all exist yet and all the work isn't already done doesn't mean it won't be done, or that it won't be done pretty easily. These things just take time. So we'll definitely get to all these arguments, and at the end of the day, I stand behind these claims that say that none of these ideas will actually stand up, and that also they're not reasonable because they're, for the most part, not falsifiable, and in the ways that they actually already have been falsified, people don't want to accept the actual evidence.
Such as Penrose's orchestrated objective reduction model, which lends itself to some extent to idealism, or integrated information theory that lends itself to panpsychism.
Well, I mean, if you just do a quick Google search on this kind of stuff, you can look up Penrose, and then quantum mind comes up. And then if you do just a quick rational wiki search for that, you'll find that there's plenty of criticisms of this stuff. And in general, this theory is considered to be style over substance, pseudoscience. At best, there are some hypotheses in here, but there's no valid theory. The problem is these ideas aren't just pseudoscientific, they're anti-scientific. Just another dude who talks out of one side of his mouth like he's a scientist, and out of the other side of his mouth undermines the entire project of science and all of the work that's been done so far. So this is a common theme. Instead of these people making an actually good positive case for their view, they make a negative case against materialist science and then postulate their idea as the other natural alternative. But actually, knocking down another view does not make your view stand. Maybe next time I go live, as I told Rasmus I would do, I can also try to sneak in some of these other what people might think of as good arguments for idealism, if you can find them and present them well.
This is strange for a group that based its identity on a rejection of idealism.
It should be obvious to any integralist that idealism is an unfounded, dogmatic, religious, backwards, debunked idea. It's not like it should really be some kind of well, let's really prove it. This is really difficult. It's like, this should kind of be a no-brainer. Like, people at this stage of development, for the most part, should be arriving at this conclusion. And again, it's a means to the end of being able to have these debates and to being able to consistently shut down these ideas. The idea that when something starts that it should already have all of its work done is unreasonable, it seems to me.
One would assume that a group that is based on epistemic humility would lead with such criticism.
I mean, just the fact that we know that it's an overstep based on just the basics of integral epistemology, it's not like we really have to make a difficult case for this. And again, I have already made videos about Wilber's case for idealism and dealt with it before I ever came out with the Integral 2.0 video. So to act like these things haven't already been done is kind of wrong.
Another argument that I've heard is that idealism is in 99% of cases explained mythically, and it gives rise to all sorts of unfounded claims. While that may be true, this is not proof that idealism must be rejected altogether. There are many valid ideas that may be true.
Yeah, this is why one of the main things I talk about is the pre-trans fallacy and pre-trans distinctions. So there is a baby to be had in that dirty bathwater, but unfortunately, a good amount of people in our community can't make the most basic integral distinctions. They have a very surface level knowledge of our integral theory. They wander into our community, learn a couple of the terms, and then think that they're already integral and integrally informed and they're already functioning perfectly at these stages, when, let's be frank, they're not. And their understanding and knowledge of the actual theory is flimsy, and often they use the theory incorrectly in a harmful freshman kind of way. So again, it's not that I would want to throw out any perspective. Obviously, we integrate diversity with discernment, but unfortunately for most people, the discernment is severely lacking. And they don't even know the basic integral distinctions that would allow for the healthy integration. They know the words transrational, but they don't actually know how to make the distinctions.
Another argument that I've heard is that idealism is in 99% of cases explained mythically, and it gives rise to all sorts of unfounded claims. While that may be true, this is not proof that idealism must be rejected altogether. There are many valid ideas that may be true, but whose proponents have taken to terrible extent. See Marxism versus communism.
Yeah, but first you would have to actually demonstrate that there's a reasonable case made for this somewhere that actually stands, right? And that's what you're not doing. You're being like, well, surely not everyone. It's like, well, why don't you provide a counter argument or a counter piece of evidence or somebody who you think is really good instead of just being offended on behalf of everyone? First, you would have to actually demonstrate that these claims are wrong, and I don't see you doing that.
In the case for idealism, the fact that people take potentially valid ideas, but push them beyond what is provable or healthy.
You could say this about any idea. Well, who's to say it's not potentially valid? I'm saying it's not valid. It's not a valid idea. It's not an idea that is compatible with integral theory. People who think it is are getting it wrong. It's not a valid idea. Not valid as a literally true idea.
But push them beyond what is provable or healthy only means that we should make stronger case for epistemic boundaries. Things are not to be considered 100% true until they're proven also in the upper right quadrants, for example, in the realm of physics. Things are not to be considered true until there is experimental evidence. Subjective experience is potentially misleading and should not be taken on its own.
See, I like what he's saying here. It sounds like we agree, right? But what I'm worried about is that maybe, again, he's kind of creating a false equivalency and acting like maybe we can't know what the actual true cosmology is because we don't know everything and we don't have 100% proof or something like this. So maybe he's just retreating into mystery in a really reasonable sounding way. Like, can you imagine a creationist saying, look, we don't know whether creationism is true or whether evolution is true. And until we have 100% of the data, we won't be able to come down on a conclusion. That's just reasonable. When actually it's a God of the gaps fallacy. I think this is wrong. I think that we definitely know that some theories are much more valid and have much more explanatory power than others. Basically, emergentism is a valid theory. It stands up to criticism and is consistent with all the data we have, while panpsychism and idealism are at best hypotheses that are unfalsifiable. But it sure looks like they actually have been falsified when we actually look at the data. It sure looks like emergentism is the correct perspective. Just like with evolution, there are gaps in our knowledge, but we have enough knowledge and enough data to be pretty sure this conclusion is accurate.
This leads me to a practical side. So the practical issue is that it's damaging to claim there is no healthy form of idealism because it prevents people who hold mythical beliefs from growing by following a path of least resistance.
We're not talking about what would be good. We're talking about what's actually true. If you can't establish that these ideas are actually true, then it wouldn't follow that it would be good to believe in them, especially not at an integral stage. We should know the difference between goodness, truth, and beauty, objective, subjective, and relative, and not conflate these conversations and these projects. It's a demonstration of bad epistemology and a lack of integral distinctions. This is confusing basic categories. What's good or what's practical is a different question from what's actually true. And the better solution is the solution that is in line with reality as it actually is. Listen, we're talking about people at an integral stage of development, right? If you are still holding on to some literal dogmatic ideas, you are not translating your tradition from an integral stage of development. We're not talking about holding integral 2.0 standards all the way down the spiral, like no one in the spiral is to believe in these things or everyone is to be, I don't know what you're thinking the integral 2.0 movement is about, but it's about creating healthy integral.
Rather than asking people to abandon their belief, I find much more efficient to ask them to better reflect on their epistemology and improve the complexity of their own thinking.
This is blue to orange. These are not issues that we should be dealing with at an integral stage. You understand that? A person at an integral stage should not have a belief in a dogmatic religious idea. These ideas should be firmly abandoned by the time a person gets to orange, and if not by then, definitely by the time a person gets to green. A person is not actually going to be in the integral stage of development. They are not really integrating diversity with discernment if they're still holding on to some pre-rational religious idea.
I find it much more important and efficient to push people to a more complex mode of thinking.
I'm not interested in asking integralists to learn some of the most basic stuff that they should have learned down the spiral. I'm looking for people who are already real integralists. Feel me?
I find it much more important and efficient to push people to a more complex mode of thinking.
This is what I would do if I was talking to a person at blue or at orange or at green, but we have different standards for people who are supposedly and supposed to be at our integral stages.
Rather than simply push them outside of ideas. It's possible to be a Christian at a mythical level as well as at an integral level.
Yes, but a Christian at an integral level doesn't believe in its tradition literally. It doesn't literally believe in God or in Jesus or any of these things. This is where a pre-trans distinction would come in. If the person actually understood their tradition in a trans-rational way, if they understood it poetically and metaphorically as just one way of talking about absolute mystery and what it is to be a human, they wouldn't be making these ultimate claims about the nature of reality on the back end of it. They would know better. In general, a real integralist can transcend and include multiple traditions. Most real integralists aren't just an integral Buddhist. They're an integral Buddhist and an integral Christian and an integral pagan. We have actually integrative practice, an integrative spirituality. not just translating one tradition from an integral stage. It's not really integral to only have one limited way of talking about things. That's actually the opposite of integral.
And it's perhaps better and easier to push people towards this line of development rather than simply ask them to abandon their faith.
Again, an integralist doesn't have faith. Faith is for pre-rational people. Pre-rational people have faith. Faith, at least according to the Bible, Hebrews 11:1, is to believe in something without evidence, without doubt. A rational plus person doesn't believe in things without evidence, without doubt. So again, this might be good methodology for people down the spiral in terms of working with them, but the Integral 2.0 movement is about working with people at the integral stage. It's about good standards and good methodology and good conclusions that are actually integral. And again, anybody at the integral stage should know that any traditional language is not the one true way. So if you have a reductionist religious traditional approach that's dogmatic, it's wrong. And it's not really integral.
This would add complexity and nuance, would diminish fundamentalist attitudes, would bring more intelligent, epistemically valid arguments, or even make people change their minds on this topic, but as a result of their own process.
Again, this is good for people down the spiral. Integral people should already know better.
If many people who are idealist would shift from a dogmatic idealism to a healthy, complex form of idealism...
Now you're assuming that there is a healthy, complex form of idealism. What if we said, if people would switch from an unhealthy, dogmatic version of believing in a flat earth to a mature, reasonable version of believing in a flat earth, then we'd be making a lot of progress. You see, you're kind of creating a false equivalency and retreating into a green flatland where all ideas are considered valid. And let's be real, some ideas are right and some ideas are wrong, and there are right and wrong conclusions to come to on certain topics. There are right and wrong answers, and cosmology is one of these topics that has a right and wrong answer. And there are justified and unjustified positions. And idealism is an unjustified, pre-rational position.
I think that would be a win for both Integral Global and Integral 2.0. And I think finding a shared goal...
See, all of this, like, let's all get along. Let's allow for everyone's views. This is not integral, my friend. This is green. When you try to make room for everyone and squash disagreements, look at your integral map. Look at what it says on the stage of green pitfalls. Inauthenticity, excessive relativism, a lack of discernment, interminable attempts at consensus. These are all problems with what you're talking about. It's a lack of judgment, overly relative, and trying to create consensus where there is actually conflict. Integral 2.0 is a challenge on Integral 1.0 to grow up. And the reason that Integral 2.0 currently exists in the form that it does is because Integral 1.0 has avoided and denied and refused to face its shadow, refused to deal with its critics. And so its critics have broken off and formed their own group, have tried to create a newer, better, healthy version. And now that we're starting to express ourselves in a more loud and clear way, now that we're starting to make some traction, you're telling us that we should all get along, acting as if we are the unreasonable and rude ones? No, we are actually the only ones who are really trying to have this debate. For years, dissenting voices have been ignored, condescended to, and swept under the rug. To act like now we should just all get along is kind of ridiculous. Now's the time for Integral to really honestly and openly face the criticisms that have been leveled against it and see on the other side what is actually the strong, good, true, reasonably justified and integral position, not to just try to make room for everybody's perspective. This is exactly what healthy development does. It puts a challenge on the previous stage to really grow up, and what gets pushed down will come up. And to try and flatten things and say, can't we all get along, is to shut down development. And this is the problem with green in general, is that it doesn't want to rock the boat. It wants to let everybody have what they already have. It doesn't want to take away anything from anyone, and it wants for us to all get along. Again, it's favoring everyone getting along and being nice to each other over actually getting it right and making progress. And that's a problem.
It's generally a great way to resolve conflicts, and perhaps this is something we can work on together.
I'm not trying to resolve conflicts. The point is the development on the other side of the conflict. The conflict is a means to a developmental end. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. We've reached the end. I hope that addresses your points and concerns. Peace.